Good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the QuickBooks webinar live desktop version. This is part one of the expert version. There's a three-part series, so today's October 22nd. Again, this is part one. We have started the recording, and this information will be available through a recording sometime down the road on our website. So you should have received a copy of the PowerPoint presentation so that you can follow along and take notes. I'm Steve Schillig, the moderator, director of the Small Business Development Center, headquartered at Kent State University, Tusk. For those not familiar with the Small Business Development Center, we provide confidential, no-charge consulting in areas such as QuickBooks, accounting, HR, computer technology, leadership, food service. Those services, again, are at no cost and all done on a confidential basis. We have muted everybody for our speakers' benefit. If you have questions, please use the chat room. You'll find the chat room if you hover over the ribbon either at the bottom of your screen or up the upper right-hand corner, and it says show conversation. Go ahead and type in your questions. I'll monitor that. Anne has been graceful enough to make sure that all the questions get answered before she goes into the next section. Have on the call today Anne Sharp, founder of Excellent Admin, finished both bachelor's and master's degree from Walsh University, worked in the accounting field for over 10 years, been teaching QuickBooks for 4 years with a specialty in small business, and most importantly, an SBDC advisor. So any assistance, direct assistance that you need, she is available to help and support you. As I mentioned, this is being recorded. If you have suggestions or recommendations of other topics or programs, please feel free to contact me or mention that in the chat room as well. Before we start, I do want to provide a bit of news. As an SBDC client, QuickBooks is offering a 1 month free and then 50% off 12 months for the new QuickBooks Online customers. So I think that would be available for anybody using desktop that's considering going to the online version. So just keep that in mind. There's not any obligation other than filling out a customer client profile form as an SBDC client, but certainly if you're thinking about that, let me know. And again, it's 1 month free and then 50% off the next 12 months if you're a new online QuickBooks client. So that's it for me. I'll turn it over to Anne, and I'll watch the chat room. Thank you.
Perfect, guys. Good morning. Hopefully today goes a lot smoother than our Poor Tuesday class. Today we're going to cover some higher level entry items. I did change up the PowerPoint a little bit compared to what our outline was, as I realized we were going to have quite a bit of extra time. So you're going to get some additional items this class that maybe you didn't anticipate that may or may not help you. We're going to talk about journal entries and when they're used, why we use them, how you do them inside of QuickBooks, and then obviously how it can affect different accounts. You're also going to see how you can change and edit transactions. You're also going to see how we can undo edits that we do, memorize transactions. Not only can we memorize transactions, but we can memorize reports. So I added that in there. We also can make copies of transactions and reports. So we're going to go over that as well. And then how to void a transaction. This is really important with checks when you're voiding check numbers. And then obviously editing customers and vendors. There's a couple different ways to do it. We're going to go over both of those. And so your PowerPoints kind of jump around a little bit with some of that. The PowerPoints look a little bit different this round, not so many images, a lot more text. We should by this time in the class be advanced enough to see and know where our buttons are if we've played around on our home screen. So we're going to keep going back to the home screen. We're going to keep doing the same steps we need to be doing. We obviously will review previous week stuff as we're going through. But I really wanted to make sure that you know that we're going to cover some of that today. So let me go ahead and change our screen here. to QuickBooks. So we're going to play around in a different file today, just because this is the one I had open. So we're going to use it. And he actually has some entries I need to do for year end, as we just finished his tax return. So when you take your pretty reports and you go to your accountant at the end of the year, your accountant is going to do the entries that need to be done. So for example, meals and entertainment, you only get 50% on your profit and loss for your company, but in QuickBooks, it's going to show a full deduction. You're also going to get a home office deduction, which is going to be an additional expense that maybe isn't in QuickBooks. And then there might be expenses like medical insurance or medical bills that you put in here because you're self-employed and you do get that deduction, but they don't actually show on the business part of your tax return. So you may need to do some entries in order to adjust those accounts. You also may need to do some entries on the balance sheet. And the balance sheet entries may be adjusting loans, car payments, fixed assets. And so, for example, you may do a depreciation expense, but you also have to do amortization of depreciation on the balance sheet. So you're going to have things that go back and forth that change the numbers overall depending on what type of assets you have. So journal entries for me, I use a lot during tax time to make sure that the books on QuickBooks match what the tax return is, because if the bank ever asks you for a financial, you just want it to line up, then you don't create any questions, then you don't have any issues with that. The other times you might do a journal entry is if you're putting in quarterly adjustments or monthly adjustments. You know, some people do depreciation on a monthly basis, so you want to do that. You could do a journal entry when you're setting up a new loan or doing a new fixed asset, pending what it is and how you paid for it. And then obviously the last time I would pretty much use a journal entry is if you're making adjustments to something specific inside of QuickBooks and you want to be able to track it. So to do a journal entry, you would go from your home page here, you would go up to company, and then you would go to make a journal entry. And it's going to always give you this warning unless you check this box that tells you not to display it. And this is to tell you that it automatically will assign numbers for journal entries. So I hit OK because I want it to remind me of that, because I changed the journal entry. So if I'm doing a journal entry, I'm going to put my initials and then I'm going to put 12/31/2020, because that's the entry that I'm trying to do for the year end. And this is going to be depreciation expense. And then we're going to go against accumulated depreciation. So journal entries have to balance on both sides. So whatever your debit amount is, so say it's $100, it has to credit $100. Okay, so they have to be even. If you aren't even and you go to try to hit save, it's going to tell you you're messing with assets, but it's also not going to let you do it because it's not match. It doesn't match. And journal entries will tell you how far you're off. So that, like, for example, it automatically knew I was off $10. I'm just doing easy numbers so that you can see it. But you want to pay attention to this. The other thing that happens is, and I do it myself sometimes, is I'll flip journal entries. What's supposed to be a debit ends up being a credit, and it happens because you're moving fast, you're not paying attention, and pending where it's going, they change. And so if you do that, like I'll save this one because I believe this should be totally backwards. If I save and close this one and I go and look at my reports, you can see that this is here and it's not a negative number, which means it's the right way. If this was a negative number, then it's not doing what I want it to do. But on the balance sheet, it is a negative number, but accumulated depreciation on the balance sheet should be a negative number. So you just have to pay attention and know what it's trying to do. This is why I encourage that your accountants either send you exactly what they want put in or they put it in for you. That way you don't have any flipped transactions, because we talked about earlier in the class, like the first week, you don't really want anything negative on here. Like you don't want a negative credit card. Like this is wrong, something's wrong here. And we already fixed this error on the tax return, but you want to make sure that we fix it inside of QuickBooks too, because it should never be a negative number. But this would be something that would be a negative number. And then again, it changes this, it added an additional $100 expense on your profit and loss. So where you thought you might have been more profitable, your tax return may say that you're not. And the banks are going to go off of everything. They're going to poke and look for all of it. So if we need to do another journal entry, we go back in here the same way, company, make a journal entry. It gives me my error again. And then say that you're doing this, and this might be a fixed asset entry. So I would put in FA for fixed asset, and then whatever date might be. So this could be 3/31/20. Okay. And that's so that I know what it's doing. So if you do more than one journal entry at a time, because you can list tons of items in a journal entry, make sure you note it so that if you look back at it, you know what it is. You can memorize journal entries. So you have this little memorize guy. So I'm going to go backwards one so that I have my sample journal entry that we're playing with today. And I'm going to go ahead and click it and tell it I want it to be memorized. And then this box pops up and I can name this journal entry. So this would be depreciation. So even though my depreciation number might change, I can still memorize the transaction. So I can tell it to remind me. I can say, do not remind me, and then I can automate the transaction entry. I like to be reminded that I need to put depreciation in. I don't like it just to go in on its own because, like I said, your depreciation, if you buy another asset each year, is going to vary. Besides that, it's obviously not always a fixed number and something that you want to look at, but it can remind you at the beginning of the next year when you send everything to the accountant that you got to remember to put that depreciation schedule in and put that entry in. You can tell it how often to remind you. Annually would be this one. And then the next date I would want it to remind me would be in 2021. I would say January 1st. And then I can hit OK. And it makes like a $ noise. You guys probably didn't hear that because you created a memorized transaction and it's there. You can also reverse journal entries. So if you put one in that you didn't mean to put in or you're trying to change something, you can reverse the entry. And it will automatically say that it's reverse of the journal entry that I had already created. So all it does is undo the previous entry. It zeroes them out. It doesn't change what you did before. All it is undoing the one so that you, instead of deleting or avoiding it, you just have reversed it so that I can see that you made the mistake and then you took it back out. Okay. We are not going to save this one. So I'm going to clear that. And I'm going to go back here to our original entry. It's still here. And then you also have the ability to delete or void. So I encourage to void. If you delete, it's gone forever. You can never see it again. It doesn't come back. You can't pull it up and have questions. If you void it, it just zeroes it. But if you had stuff written in the memo line or anything like that, it's still going to be a record in here that you tried on 12/31/2020 to put a depreciation entry in and it didn't go in because it's zeroed, but it's going to show that you tried and that we can go back and look at it in history. So this is important if you print a check and you print it upside down. Obviously that check can't clear. And so you would want to void the check so that if, God forbid, a check number of that check number comes through your bank account, you know that it's fraudulent and you can prove it's fraudulent with the bank because you voided it in QuickBooks. You kept a copy of the printed upside down check, right? It's also going to make sure that you keep your bank balance accurate if you void it. You can void invoices. That's another area you can void. I encourage voiding again to keep the record. So if a customer isn't going to pay you or you ended up bartering services or however that played out, you can void a invoice, which will keep the history of what you sold and what you did, but obviously make it zero and zero out sales tax and anything else that you might have on there. So I always encourage to void instead of delete, because if you delete, it's never comes back and you can lose where you're at and have no idea what's going on. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and hit revert down here. My revert button, because I had not saved it, even though I made all those changes to this, it goes back to what it was originally. So as long as you never leave this screen, you can hit revert and go back to what it was before. If you leave the screen, meaning you've saved it, you've closed it, and everything like that, you don't revert back to the original transaction. You would revert back to the one that's been saved last. So you can change things and then realize like, oh no, that's not right. And you can revert back to it as long as you haven't left that screen. Okay, so the revert feature works when you're typing something and you think you did it like in a number inversion. So instead of putting 1, 2, 3, I put 1, 3, 2. It happens when you're typing, and because I don't know, always look at my keyboard, so it does happen with numbers next to each other. And if I needed to double check it, I could hit revert and go back to it, write it down, and then type it again. So the revert feature is kind of nice for that. It's nice if you're splitting up transactions and then realize you split them wrong and you want to go back to the beginning instead of trying to retotal everything. So you can do that as well. So you have your revert button on journal entries. So journal entries are pretty simple. If you use certain accounts, like let me see if I can get an accounts receivable, which he might not actually use, so it may not be in here. Yeah, he doesn't have it. If you use an accounts receivable account in a journal entry, it's going to ask you for a customer. So you may have to actually put a customer in. If you're messing with that, I always put myself in. I'm the customer for year-end entries. Unless you really are trying to adjust somebody's transactions, which more than likely we wouldn't do inside of here. I'd rather you do a discount in an invoice if you're working with something for a customer, or void out the transaction instead of doing a journal entry to revert it. Areas people use journal entries that are not ideal is when they're putting in credit card transactions or putting in payroll. And the reason I say that is because a journal entry is not an auditable item. So if the bank comes in and they audit your books, or an IRS auditor comes in and audits the books, and you've done a bunch of journal entries, they're going to request physical paper because you could have put anything in on a journal entry. So for example, journal entries are lump sum entries. So what you may do is, if you're looking at a credit card statement and you go to automobile expenses, okay, well, say you go to the gas station 4 times, so you could say you spent $40 times 4 times, you've got a lump sum entry here. Well, unless you drive a big truck and gas is expensive, a little car or an SUV is not going to cost you $160 in one tank fill. So when you do a lump sum journal entry, although it may be more efficient, you have more room for error and you have more room for questions, and then you have to prove a lot more of those things. If you're doing just entries inside of QuickBooks and you're doing it as a bank account entry, each individual item is here. So you have a name of where you were and you have a total dollar amount. So if they go through this and they're like, oh, well, this guy he cuts trees for a living. That's what this customer does. So to see a Hartville hardware is not a question, right? To see a Fastenal is not a question. Those are materials he probably needs to cut trees. Straight Talk is, telephone expense. He's got a lot of fuel in here. Amazon is a little interesting, so they may question an Amazon expense. Pending your industry, certain things are going to be normal and certain things are going to not be normal. But if he had lumped all these fuels and all these cell phones and all these tools, then he's going to need to prove what they are individually so that the IRS auditor can know that it's there. It's also hard. You don't reconcile a journal entry. A journal entry can go in to a credit card and you can click it, but it's not like you actively going through and checking each thing off your bank statement, so it's not reconciled. So although you can use them for that, I do discourage that personally, because you don't know exactly what's being spent. It's an easy way for somebody to lump expenses, or just say like, oh, I have petty cash at the end of the year. I'm going to just break it up by 20%, 30%, 40%, and then go from there, right? Well, that's 90%. Where's the other 10%, right? And at that point, the numbers aren't real at all based on what you're breaking it up to, because you're just doing a bulk entry. And so again, you have no proof if somebody were to come in and check it. It's also confusing for your accountant. Your accountant may go, how did you spend $300 in gas in 30 days? You didn't go, you don't drive that far. You only have a car, like it could be where you're putting in expenses that weren't supposed to be in there. It's going to skew the data on the profit and loss as well if it's not accurate. So I encourage everybody to be accurate, because it's important if somebody goes to buy your business. It's also important for you to see trends on how your expenses inflate or deflate pending what time of year it is. So it's really important that we watch all of that stuff. Okay. So you saw how journal entry played into the financials. So let's do a journal entry into the bank account just so that you guys can see it. So we'll do a citizens. We're going to do 500. And then we're going to say that he actually put this money in from owner's draw, which you would need to do it. You don't need to do a journal entry for, but we will do a journal entry for. So I'm going to hit save and new. So that goes away. And then if I scroll down here, he took $500 out of the business for owner's draw. This transaction is no different than doing because it's doing the same thing. See how the expenses are here, the account's the same. Instead of being a journal entry, it's a transfer. But if I go up here to reports and I go to my balance sheet and I click on owner's draw, they're both right here. So it's just a matter of how you want to see it and what you're trying to do. If you're doing a beginning entry or an open balance entry, you're going to need to do a journal entry to do that, because you have to make sure the bank balances match. But other than that, you wouldn't really need to do it. Do we have any questions about journal entries?
Not at this time.
Okay, perfect. So we kind of touched on how you can memorize a journal entry. So if you go in here, you can see you have your little memorized cloud guy right here. Okay, so where do these go when we actually memorize them? So if you list and you look at memorized transactions, the transaction that we created is right here. Now I can click on this and I can hit save and new, and it would put this memorized transaction in. Okay. I also, because I don't want to save that one right now, down here where it says memorized transactions, I have a little arrow where I can delete it. I can edit it, which takes me here, and you can change the date that you're trying to see it during, and you can hit OK. And I can obviously do a new group, which is a new memorized transaction. So let's do say he's trying to predict his sales each month, and he wants to put in what he's predicting so that he can have an idea of where he should end the year for financial conversations. So he wants to do this on a monthly basis. He wants this to start November 22nd so we can see it. He just wants this to go automatically in. And then let's go ahead and do OK. So now it says it's sale, it's frequently is never, meaning that it's only when he decides to put it in. It's going to auto right now, and then it's part of a group. So we created that, no problem. So now say we don't need that one anymore. So I want to delete that memorized transaction. It's going to delete the one in green that's highlighted. So I'm going to hit OK. So then if I want to do enter transactions, because the one above this was highlighted green, now this one's green, now I can hit enter transactions down here. And it'll take me to the same place as if I double clicked it. Okay. So you can do, your list shows up here in memorized transactions. You can do journal entries as memorized transactions. You can also do invoices as memorized transactions. So if we are up in our customer and we go to create invoice, and you go to memorize here. So let me go backwards. I'm going to create an invoice to us. I'm creating an item like we talked about. Okay. And then say he cut down 5 trees for me. So it's $2,500. I can create a memorized here to add to reminder list. And how often do I want it? I would say annually. Well, let's do a quarterly one. And then the next date is today. And now it's saved here. So if I save and close, you can see my invoice is here to do it. So those of you that charge trees are infrequent. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you have a great tree cutter, you're going to come back to him, but you cut trees probably once a year if you have to. Where somebody like me who does bookkeeping or taxes, that stuff reoccurs every month and it's the same cost. So you would probably want to do that in here to make your life a lot easier when it came down to billing time. When you have memorized transactions and they come due, and you're logging back into QuickBooks for the first time, you're going to get a box that pops up that says memorize transactions. And then it lists the ones that should be put in. And then if you don't put them in, you have an option at the bottom to dismiss right now, meaning you want them to pop up the next time, or enter all, or you can go in and adjust them inside of here if you realize that one of your memorized transactions is no longer one that you need. You can come in and delete it, and then it would come out of that list. Okay. Memorized transactions, car payments would be good ones, rent payments would be good ones, so that you don't have to enter them in each month. You know that they're the same amount of money each month. Depreciation is another one, although you have to change the numbers, is still to remind you to put in your depreciation. Could be a really good one. And then obviously the list goes on pending what your industries are that you can do any of all of those. Okay. So let's go back over here. So we talked about how you can do it from a customer perspective, creating an invoice and making it memorized. We talked about how you can do it from a journal entry perspective, making it memorized. And then if you click on an expense here, you can memorize an expense inside of here. So this memorize button is almost always here, no matter what you're doing inside of QuickBooks. You can even memorize a bill. It's still right there. So when you enter a bill, you can memorize a bill too. So you definitely can do this across the board. Memorized transactions are supposed to make your life easier. And obviously make it less labor intensive for the things that are reoccurring transactions. Some people like them, some people don't. I'm indifferent. I don't really care. I'm going to make sure the entries get put in no matter how they're put in. But from an efficiency perspective, it's definitely an option to help you with that. Okay. So that's how you do memorize transactions, journal entries, bills, editing a transaction. You manually create a memorized transaction and all of that. So you can do a lot of that in here. Okay. QuickBooks Online does not have anything that you can memorize. It has the ability to create rules, which is almost comparable. So this is one of the specialty features to desktop that you have the ability to create here. Okay. So we've talked about memorized transactions. So let's talk a little bit more about voiding things inside of QuickBooks. So if I go into customers and I go to create an invoice and I want to go backwards here to the invoice we created, just so that we're using the same stuff, okay? Up here under delete, you have a little arrow. So if I delete it, it disappears. I have no record that Excellent Admin ever came here, that we ever did tree work for them or anything, right? But if I void it, I'm going to see that I still sold them trees at my rate was $500, but my amount due is 0. Okay. So it's really important that you do that. That way, if you ever questioned or people are like, well, can I have the same rate I had last year? Well, our rates change each year. We increase as cost increases most of the time, right? So if somebody's asking you to honor their rate from the previous year, it would be nice to know that you have a record of what it was instead of just deleting it. Then, so say I voided this, but I haven't left this screen yet. So if I click this revert button, I can get it back to where it was. If I was like, oh, well, you know what? I don't know that I want to do it that way. I definitely want to see it this way. Okay. You also can just 0 this but it changes your rate to 0, which if you're trying to keep the historical data is maybe not the way to do it. It's a preference on you. I'm a big fan of the void button. I void a lot. Okay. So I'm going to revert this back so that we can leave this, and I'm going to hit save and close. Okay. Inside of here, say we're in the bank account because that's where we are right now. I'm going to put in the owner's draw like we had before. Okay. If I click on this and click edit transaction, because it's a transfer, I get a box like this. So I don't have my buttons to tell me to void, to memorize, to transfer, to delete, or anything like that, right? I'm going to hit save and close. If I delete this and say I put this kind of transaction in, so it has somebody's name and has professional fees, and I hit edit transaction, now I have this. So if we don't fill out names and we're just doing transfers, then we don't get a check looking item on our edit transaction. We get a transfer box, which transfer boxes can only be deleted or voided from inside the bank ledger, not from clicking it and opening it to have all our options to do all these things. Okay. And again, here, if I click void, I'm going to click save and close, and it gives you the option. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes, I want to void it. And then here, you'll see that it puts in a voided number here. It makes it 0, but it's still in here. Okay. And same here. It's still here. So you have to pick what you're trying to do so that you know what's going on. Now, if I delete this, it's gone. I don't have any history. I don't have anything to show me what's going on. Okay. And I can't bring it back. It's gone. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, with journal entries, okay. So with this, if I were to do Arby's, and I want to say we spent $25 at Arby's, it's meals and entertainment. Okay. I'm going to right click this, and I can void it right here. And I'm going to hit enter. And then see how it has the little check mark here? So it automatically is going to reconcile this so that it doesn't populate in my reconciliation screen. You can turn this setting off, and if you turn it off, like I'll uncheck this so that we can see it. And I'm going to go to the reconcile screen here. And I'm just going to make it $1 for training purposes here. And you scroll all the way down here, it's right here. So if you void and you don't have it set up to where it's automatically going to reconcile that transaction for you, when you do your next reconciliation, you want to click it so that they don't just sit in here and build up every time you void a transaction. Okay. So it's really important that we pay attention to that. I'm going to hit leave there, which takes us back here. Okay. So edit transaction under the delete button is void. That's how you would take care of it. Okay. If you know that for some reason you have a duplicate transaction and you know 100% it's a duplicate transaction, you're never going to need to see it again. You just didn't move your ruler down on your bank statement for a line, you can delete it because you're never going to need it. It was never a real transaction. You only went to Arby's once that week, so you wouldn't need 2 of them, right? So you can, that's a situation where deleting it is not a big deal. It's really more on the vendor side and the customer side that you may not want to delete. So again, create invoice here. Under your delete button, you have void here. If you go into company and you go to make a journal entry, you have your void button here. And then if you go into vendors, enter bills, you have a void button here. Okay, so it's the memorized transactions. You have void buttons on every every type of transaction you could want to do. There's multiple ways to get to the void, but it gives you the ability to know that it's there. Okay, so we talked about voiding transactions. Now, if you go to edit, you have options here too. Copy bill, void bill, memorize bill, duplicate bill, new bill. Okay, so you have this filter here, this edit changes based on what's open on your screen. So we were on the bill page. So now let me go to edit, and now it says new journal entry, duplicate journal entry, memorize journal entry, void journal entry. Okay, so you have it under your edit button as well. And it just depends on what's open is going to tell you what your edit screen is. And again, invoices here. Okay, that's a preference on how you want to get to it. Just know that QuickBooks tries to make it easy, and there are multiple ways to get through it. If you also ever need to Google, feel free to Google. They have tons of YouTube videos on things. If you can't seem to think you can find it or go from there, don't hesitate to look up something. They have great instructions sometimes on YouTube. Okay. So you've learned the trick of the edit button. Okay, so that you know what that is. Let's go into the transactions here. So we have a customer list, which is people that are buying our goods and services. And then we have a vendors list, which is people that we are purchasing things from to make sure our business functions. So if you go up here, you have a vendor center here. In my vendor center is all the vendors you could possibly be using. So a vendor would be Subway, Excellent Admin. It could be, if you went to a gas station, it can be Office Max. Those are going to be your vendors. Okay. So up here, you can add new vendors. You can add multiple vendors, which would be uploading an Excel document. You can use this little pencil guy here to edit any vendors. So 100bulbs.com. And in here, you have other account settings you can do, which we kind of went through when it was talking about setting up 1099s. Okay. You can add attachments here. This attachment, it would be like a W-9. You could keep a W-9 in here on your vendors that are going to need to be issued a 1099. Okay. This is what people don't realize is that QuickBooks Desktop gives you the ability to create customized labels, letters. You can print envelopes. You can download your customer list and use it in a mail merger in Excel if you need to do it that way. And you can do it both on the vendor side and the customer side. So here's how you can prepare a vendor letter. And you're going to hit copy a template. You can select which vendors are going to get it. Okay. And then hit next. And then it can be a credit request, it can be a dispute, it can be a fax, it can be payment on account, it can be a blank vendor letter. You can create other templates. And then your title and name. Okay. And you would follow this through, and then you could print this. If your printer has the ability to print envelopes, it will prompt you to print envelopes. If your printer has the ability, obviously all printers have the ability to print a letter. So we would print a letter. So you have that option. But this little pencil guy here is going to be really how we edit these guys. If you have somebody that you didn't work with before, you worked with before, quit working with, and now are going back to working with, if you made them inactive, you may want to look at all vendors, and any of the inactive ones will have a little X here and will pop back up and they'll be grayed out. If you are only looking to see the ones that you're working with currently and you keep this list clean like we talked about previously, then you would leave it under active vendors and everybody you would need would be here. So let's go over here to customers and look at the same thing. So we have a customer center as well. The customer center looks exactly the same. Okay. You have all customers. So if you had any inactive customers, you have only active customers to see. The customers are going to show you all the history of all your invoices, and everything in here is clickable. So it's really important you know that it's clickable. You can sort it by year. You can add in notes for customers and dates and everything like that. And then this little pencil icon up here again is how you would edit a customer. So here I would do and I would hit OK. And now you can see that it's up here. And again, you can add attachments up here. Customer attachments might be like sales tax exempt sheets that you need to keep, because if you're not charging them sales tax and you get audited, you got to be able to prove it. That's more of up to you. You can obviously upload from the computer, use a scanner, or do anything like that. And then again, you can print your customer list. You can download it into Excel. You can create letters. And they have like here's a bounce check letter. Let's see if I can get this one to populate for you guys. And usually when you use the letter feature the first time, like you see here, is taking a minute. It doesn't normally take that long once you've used it once or twice. Let's see here. Okay, so let me show you what the letter looks like. Okay, so this is what the letter looks like. If you have your own logo and stuff in there, it'll have your logo, and then obviously it fills in all the information that you're doing. So it's like a generated letter so that you can build it based on what you're trying to do. And it's a formal letter, so it's your normal template, but it's going to save you a lot of time if there's an issue with this. And then you can obviously, we'll talk probably the last class when we're making custom invoices and custom letter templates. We'll talk about what you can change to make it more your style, so that instead of prompting it into Word, that you have to then go back and make more edits. So let's go back over here. Okay. And then I would hit cancel because we're done with that. Okay. So you could do the same thing on the vendor side, like they need to make, you need to make payments, that type of thing. It's obviously a good way to generate mass letters for, nonprofits that might be trying to collect money, and making sure that we're paying, getting everything we need that way. So you have a lot of areas for that. Do we have any questions about editing customers or vendors at this point?
We do have a question. I think it goes back to your general journals. Regarding attachments, are there any concerns with relying only on attachments in the event of an audit? We currently scan, attach, and shred all originals.
So I'm a paper hoarder, so I do the opposite. I'm all about scan it and attach it, and then obviously I also keep it saved in another spot. And then for the current year you're working in, I usually keep it through the end of the year and make sure the taxes are filed before I get rid of somebody's originals. Technically, you're supposed to keep the stuff for 3 to 5 years. At most 7 years. It's not that serious if you've got it scanned in somewhere, because if your office burned to the ground, you're not going to have them, right? But if your computer crashes, you got to have it somewhere else too. So my IT people back it up, put it in a cloud, plus it's on my file, plus I keep paper, and that's just me being, kind of overprotective of it. But as long as you've got it saved in more than one spot, you can shred all day long. You don't need to keep hundreds of receipts, by no means.
He said thank you.
No problem. Okay, so then I want to talk about copies. So if you go up here, and so a good thing to copy each month would be like a life insurance bill or a car insurance bill or a business insurance bill. You know that until they adjust your rate, that it's going to be the same amount of money each month, right? And it's going to come up on your bank statement. So you definitely want to keep track of it and make sure you're following along. So if you go up here and you go to vendors and you go to enter a bill, and I can go to this find button here, which populates this little guy here, and let's go to Arby's. Okay, I'm gonna find some Arby's transactions. Oh, well, it says we don't have any. Let's see. And this is because he doesn't use the bill feature. Okay, let me create a bill. Let's do public services would be a good one. Okay. So say we pay them $50 every month. It obviously is a utility. I'm going to hit save and new. So if I go up here and search Republic Services, now this comes up. So we pay it every month. So I can create a copy up here. Now this is the new transaction, and you can see because there's more than one bill, right? And you can change the date from the 11th to December 11th, and you can hit save and close. And then if you go to pay bills, you see there's 2 Republic Waste bills here. So you can create a copy because in a click of a button and a change of a date, you've got the transaction entered without having to type everything. You can also go into company or go into customers and go to invoices, and you can create a copy of invoices as well. So if you're doing the same work for multiple people, so he cuts 5 trees down for, 10 people a week or whatever it is, right? All he would have to do is change this to, if I could get my caps lock to work, there we go. All he has to do is change the customer. This is still here, and he can save a new. And if you go to reports, customer and financials, the AR report, you've got your 2 customers that have 2 bills. And he didn't have to type out his whole description or change his pricing or do anything. All you have to do is change the customer. I use the copy feature all the time because my customers pay the same thing month after month after month. So I copy each month the invoice because the verbiage and everything that they're doing is the same. The month is the only thing changing. Okay. So you obviously have that copy feature there. And then if you go to customers or I'm sorry, company, and you want to go to journal entry, you have the ability to make a copy of a journal entry as well. So if you don't use memorized transactions, which is okay, you have the ability to still save some of the entry time by creating a copy of the things you're trying to do. So depreciation would be a great one. You can create a copy of the transactions and adjust the numbers each year without having to do anything else. And then, like I said, make sure you just change what you're doing with it so that you can track what's going on. So we have the ability to do that. Now, if you go into a journal entry, so we'll go back over here. So see how you have a main tab and you have a reports tab, okay? If you click on this reports tab, you can see the history of the transaction. So a blank transaction doesn't have a history. So let me go backwards to the one that we played with. Well, apparently that one doesn't want to have, let's see if I can do this. No, okay. So because I'm the only one in here working on this, sadly, I don't have anything that shows you transaction lists, but you do have the ability to see the history. So the time that this would play in is actually, let's look at a bill. Let's go backwards to find one of our bills. And I can look at a quick report, which is going to show the bills paid to that vendor. But if you look at the transaction history, you're going to be able to see it over here where it says loading. So it shows you that you have 2 bills and you have payments. Those payments are from before we entered bills. And then once this bill is paid, so if I go back here and I go, reports, now I go to this transaction history. and I'm going to get a box that looks like this. That's going to show me the payment. But if you have more than one user in here, you can see who edited it, how often it was edited, when was the bill put in, when was it clicked on, when was it actually paid, where was it paid from. You can see you get a whole list of items, all the things that are going on with that transaction. You can do the same thing with a journal entry. Once there's more than one user inside of there, you can view the history, you can know which way everything's going, and then obviously make sure that all the changes are done. So a lot of times when I click on something like this, like they're like, oh, well, this invoice isn't paid. And I'm like, well, let me click on this payment amount. And had you paid more than one invoice, see how these are listed here? The ones with check marks would be all the things that you paid on that dollar amount, right? And so you can see the history of all the bills being sent in one check by clicking through on your transaction history. And then once you're back in the bank account, you can click on the transaction history again and bring it back up. Okay. So if we go out of here, let me get back into the bank account and let's see if these show transaction history. So yeah, so if you just enter it and it's not going through multiple stages of QuickBooks, it considers there's no transaction history because the only history you would have would be the item that you're looking at right now. Okay. So it gives you kind of an idea on how you can see that and track what's going on. And we talked about how important users are and making sure that we really dive in to keep people separate so that we know who's changing things or if there's a mistake, who made it, or, you know, if we decided to change things a different way and it's something new, then we obviously need to make sure that everybody does the new way versus part doing the old way, part doing the new way, because it can be really challenging that way. Okay. So that is really everything that we had to cover today. And kind of you guys saw how it plays in to, you know, all the higher level stuff with QuickBooks and how you can easily make changes to things, but obviously we still get a lot of the messages from QuickBooks that are like, are you sure you want to do this? Can we really do this? And then obviously we're seeing how you can track transactions as long as they're not just entered in as the bank account, you're doing the bill, paying the bill, you know, those types of things. And then we've talked about how you would do journal entries and why it's important. So Steve, I would kind of open it up to more questions about some of the stuff we covered today before I cover the last item I do want to cover with everybody.
Okay. Nothing in the chat room at this point, but we'll give everybody a minute or two because you went over some important things. So we'll give them a minute or two. And as maybe they're typing, just another note, if you are thinking about converting to desktop, don't forget the offer right now by Intuit for the first month free and the remaining 12 months at half cost. So, and Ian, that's a pretty good deal, isn't it? If they're on the border of making that decision.
Yes, and just make sure that if you decide to make that transition, that you still port up your data from desktop to online, because that is a really good deal for the first year, and it would give you some time to practice with it and see if it was something you like. You can always bring the data back down. It is easy to move.
And I think you've mentioned before, but you have done some transfers from desktop to online, and you'd be available to assist.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, gotcha. And I'm not pushing online. I'm on desktop because I prefer desktop, but there might be some that are on the border right now, on the fence.
Yeah, I've had some people reach out to me and ask me questions like, what's the difference? It's really what you're trying to accomplish with online. The goal of online is the seamless integration feature, the on the go, the multiple users not needing to be in the same network, and being able to access it from anywhere. So if you're going for that, then online is the way to go. If you're only ever going to sit in your office to do your accounting and you're not ever going to integrate it with your bank account, you're not going to sync everything up, then don't do online. The whole point of it is that filter. But desktop has more customization features without spending more money, because it doesn't cap as many accounts as you can use, or as many customers as you can have, or if you're using classifications, those types of things. So you just kind of want to pay attention to it.
Okay, not seeing any questions, so if you want to finish up, I think.
Okay, so we haven't really talked about this last thing. So if you guys ever notice that when you open QuickBooks Desktop that it takes a long time to load, it's usually because we've got a million things running in the background. So for example, I can go in here and I can make a deposit and that screen pops up. And then I could go here and I can enter a bill and that screen's going to pop up. And then say I go here and I want to create an invoice, that screen pops up. It's not taking away the things you're doing underneath it. It's just stacking stuff on top of it. So if you don't go through and X out, and here was the one we did before that, and the one we did before that, and the one we did before that, and the bank account, and here's the chart of accounts, to get back to the home screen, which still might not be my bottom account, because here's another account we were working on. Until you get to the gray screen, the things are still running in your background. And the more you have open, the more bogged down it can run, and can take up to 5 minutes to open. At one point, I didn't realize this, and I just kept opening things and working in my file, but I noticed it was taking forever for it to load when I would open it. And so I started realizing that that's because I had all this stuff running in the background. If you ever send accountants copies or anything like that, it automatically will force close everything for you. So every once in a while it'll do it, but really make sure that you X out of stuff. You don't have it minimized in boxes on boxes, because it really can bog down the opening and closing of your QuickBooks file. QuickBooks desktop runs pretty fast based on your machine. So we don't want to make it so it's bogged down at all. And then there is a way to like view, let me see here. This open windows, if you have stuff open, it would be listed here. So like if you think you've closed it all, you haven't closed it all, if you click this open windows, if you have this listed here, you can close it. If it's blank, then you don't have anything open, which means that QuickBooks isn't going to be bogged down when it goes to open. Okay. So that's just a little trick I tell people, it's like our phones. You got to go in every once in a while and close your apps because it's just too much running. It's the same concept here. But I didn't know if people realize that even though you're switching what you're doing, the reports aren't closing unless you're actually closing them. And Steve, that was just the last thing I wanted to talk about today.
Okay,
So,
great.
Next week, we're going to talk about creating sub-accounts. And then we're going to talk about how we can edit company information. And then we're going to talk about sales tax. And then obviously setting up emails and stuff like that. There are some things we can do on desktop to streamline, to make it so that communication with customers is still there. And then obviously you can still email out pending your version of QuickBooks. You'll still be able to email everything. I believe it has to just be 2018 or newer. And then sales tax, and then we're going to talk about purchase orders and a few things like that. Some people may not use purchase orders. They may not apply to some of you, but I want you to know the feature, because you can obviously play into a couple additional steps with bills, where if you have create a purchase order, then you receive an item receipt, and then you flip it to be a bill. But you have to do all those steps or it doesn't work. And so I'm going to show you the importance of that. And then we're going to talk about how we can edit some company information. So those are going to be our next steps here. And this again is a lot higher level, nitty gritty stuff. Not you're going to use it all the time. You may use it to set it up originally. You may make adjustments to it. But other than that, it's going to stay pretty consistent once you've picked what you're trying to see on your financial statements.
Okay. And we have a question coming in, and so why she's coming in as a desktop user right now. I hope that between now and when we end the sessions, that maybe you'll go through how you go through saving a file. I get confused at times when I have to save a file. So
like to back it up.
Back it up. I'm sorry. Yes,
yeah.
Back it up.
We did talk about that on the first class. But I will review it the last class because obviously you really should be doing it each time you get in and out of the software at least once a week. I tell people to do it after you do your reconciliations at a minimum. But basically, if you do a big data dump or a big entry project, you want to back it up because if something happens, and I trust technology little to nothing, you want to make sure it's backed up to the most recent file and you're not losing data in that process.
Maybe I misspoke. I understand backing it up, but retrieving, because they QuickBooks has like QBT. They have different.
Yep, absolutely. So you want to
So
retrieve. Yeah.
yeah,
We
whether
will
anybody
still
else
cover that in the
maybe
last
that's
class
okay.
as well.
Good. I was going to say maybe that's a one-on-one, but I get confused when I see all the different versions, and I know there's something to it. So I'm sorry if I missed this, but how do we go about taking advantage of the discount for online that you mentioned? Very easy. Lacey, if you have I'll put my email address in there. Just send it to me now, and I'll send you the contact information from the Association of Small Business Development Centers. So, type my email in now. Yeah, so there's my email, my direct phone. So just send me an email or call me, and we'll connect you with that contact information. So, and again, I'm not pushing online, but if you are thinking about it, now would be the time to. And I like the idea of running a dual system, and see if you like it, and paying half the cost, and then converting completely maybe after several months. So. Okay, well, the part 2 of the expert session will be next Thursday at 10 o'clock. And again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Ann directly or ask us in the chat room. So have a good rest of the day. Thank you.